Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And Sean from Tested.
And today we are going to be reviewing a 3D printer, one that you've been very excited to test.
Super excited about. We had the Formlabs Form 1 Plus about a year or so ago, which was a great SLA printer, and this is the update to Form 2.
The Form 2, now this is a SLA printer. Some of the printers we've tested in the past and shown you guys in the past are FDM printers. Yeah. Now to give a quick overview, what's the difference between an FDM printer and an SLA printer?
So FDM is typically what you're finding in your home printer category most of the time. It's one that has plastic filament on a spool. You feed it into a hot end, basically a glorified hot glue gun, and it will draw each layer with the plastic layer by layer until it's finished. Usually uses either ABS, like Lego plastic, or PLA, which is a biodegradable plastic, versus SLA, which is a resin-based printer. So it has a liquid resin that is UV sensitive, and it's cured by laser in this case. There are other ones that are called DLP printers, which cure by basically a DLP projector, which shoots the layer at one time versus drawing the layer with the laser.
So instead of melting plastic, you're curing plastic.
Right.
And it's still doing it layer by layer. So some of these terms still apply when we're talking about layer resolution, or we're talking about the print bed size, volume size. We'll get to all of that. We actually have the Form 2 running right now. It's about to finish a print. And you can see we're printing your scuttlefish.
Yep.
If you've seen a 3D printer like a MakerBot, an Ultimaker, an FDM printer, the build platform is on the bottom.
Right.
And the filament comes from the top and it prints up. SLA printers, like at least the Formlabs Form 1 and Form 2, they print upside down.
It's a little hard to get your head around. It's kind of like a bat hanging from the platform here.
Yeah, so the build platform is that top piece, and it's moving along the z-axis. It's actually going up and down with every layer.
Correct.
And what you have then is a reservoir of resin that gets wiped, and then the laser is beneath that too?
Yep, so there's a sealed chamber with mirrors in the laser optics down there, and as you can see, it's basically drawing the layer with the laser. Wherever the layer hits in that liquid, it solidifies it.
But it's actually going through the tray, the reservoir liquid, and then also hitting and curing those exact same points.
So when it lowers it down, it's basically touching the bottom of the platform, which is a soft, optically clear silicon. And then once it's touching the bottom, there's a very thin gap where there's a layer of liquid between the model, and then the laser cures and bonds it to the rest of the model.
Wow. What are some of the advantages, or differences at least, in terms of the finished model when you're talking about something that's FDM printed like this, or something that's SLA printed?
It can be it can be a little deceiving because, so for example, the lowest setting on this layer-wise is 100 microns, which is 0.1 millimeters, which is pretty much the same thing for the highest setting on an FDM printer. So you're like, well, what's the big deal? But the difference with a resin printer in this case is the detail or the feature resolution. So the feature resolution is basically how fine of a detail can it draw. So like on the scuttlefish, for example, which has a lot of little rivets and fins and stuff like that, can it resolve those? Can it actually print those? And while if you set this to the same layer resolution as the FDM printer might not be able to resolve the rivets, for example.
Yeah. So the layers may be the same type, and so you may see the same like striations on it, but when we're talking about feature, on an FDM printer, you're working on two motors that have to move precisely on the X and Y axis.
Right.
And so those stepper motors and those rails limit how fine you can draw the outline of each layer.
Correct. And you'll also find just a little bit of differences, like how clean do the layers match up. You'll find it's typically a little cleaner on the resin prints than versus the FDM.
Well, let's talk about the prints themselves. Since we've had this for over a month, we've been using it
like crazy,
printing so much stuff, having a ton of fun with it, and having a lot of success. So some of the prints that you want to show off not only compare the prints from the Form 2 with the Form 1, but also some other professionally printed models you've had.
Yes.
Now, we've printed a ton of these.
The scuttlefish is quite popular.
Yeah, the scuttlefish is being printed right now. Here's an example of one of the first things we printed with the clear resin at one of the highest resolutions. It looks beautiful. And there's support material that you removed already.
Yeah.
And then you printed some additional ones. So let's talk about these right here.
Yeah, so we should talk about, let's go back to resolution real quick. So this printer will, the lowest setting is 100 microns, but it'll also do 50 and 25 microns. So it'll go down to 0.025 millimeters.
Theoretically, a layer 4 times as thin as a highest resolution FDM printer.
Now that is resin dependent. Currently, the only ones that will do 0.025 are black, gray, and they're castable materials. The other ones are limited at 0.05, which frankly, for most prints, I didn't feel the need to go beyond that because it looks really good. So yeah, we have a variety of scuttlefishes here. So what we did is I did not pay for this. I want to put the disclaimer on, but I had a professional print of the scuttlefish done in a black resin. It's at 0.05 millimeters. And believe it or not, this little guy from a professional print lab was $200.
Wow. So that's a service that you can send your model to. It still uses SLA and costs $200 to print that model. And so it made a lot of sense for us to want to do a direct comparison.
Yes. Now it is beautiful. It's very nicely done. The little details such as the propellers even came out. But I had one issue I had this is they didn't have the best orientation for this because you can see the print layers on top, which in that level of print, you can orient it so it wouldn't. But we did the exact same settings and the exact same size on the Formlab, and I also did the exact same orientation. And so, because you can even see the print lines are pretty much lining up, and it really, really held up to the really expensive print. Now, there is some things like, so this propeller didn't turn out quite the whole way like this one did. It's a very fine detail, which I didn't actually expect it to turn out because it's so fine and it's unsupported. Now, and the tentacles look great. Now, where you start to see some differences if we flip it over here. So we got the Pro print here and this. Now, disclaimer, when this comes out, you have all these support rods on it that you need to take it off of. So that's what it's hanging from the platform with. So in this case, the professional place removed the supports and they sanded and cleaned it.
They finished it for you.
Yeah, so there is a certain, even with as nice as these turn out, there's a certain amount of cleanup that you have to do. So with this one, I literally just cleaned this off before I did this. So I just yanked off the supports. There's no cleanup, not even with an X-Acto or anything. So this could look much better than it does, okay? But you'll notice there is a little bit of mushiness that happens down here. This is the bottom, basically. And there's a little bit of mushiness and compared to the top, which is much finer.
Yeah, think about that for a second. The way this comes out of the printer, if you look at the scuttlefish, we actually orient it not like this. It's oriented like this. You have the supports, the bed is on top, the supports are tapping into the top of this, and as it's coming out of the resin and getting cured, of course, the bottom part is going to get most of the benefits of the cure.
Right, because if you think about it, what it's doing is drawing a bunch of little spears, basically, that this initial layer has to be drawn on top of. And that's tricky business, because you're talking about if you're doing a 0.05 millimeter layer, the very first layer that you lay down there, that's a tricky business to get that nice and neat and perfect. And that's a good a comparison. That we'll talk about that when we get to supports. But there is a big difference between this and, say, a tens of thousands of dollars machine that makes this a little bit neater. But all things considered, I think this is a pretty impressive comparison.
Absolutely. We definitely didn't spend $200 worth of material to print this.
Now let's move to this guy.
Yeah. So
this is also off the form.
Right. Also off the form too. And for this one, you oriented the way you would have printed it to hide the layers, to have it meld with the curves. And it's frankly beautiful.
And it's also at the highest layer. So this is 0.05, this is 0.025.
Now you can still see, at least with the black material, the individual layers.
Sure.
It's not invisible.
No.
But there's so much detail. Like, this is sharp.
Yeah. And if you put a layer of primer on that, most of the layers would more or less disappear. Yeah, the little fins it's like a little saw.
Even if you look at the bottom.
The bottom's a lot cleaner.
Yep.
Now that's because, so this one printed this way, hanging upside down. This one I oriented like this.
Diagonally.
And part of the reason for that, what you're going to find with the resin printers, there is an art to orientation. And the program will try to help you out and orient it how it thinks it should. But sometimes, you know, you have the face of something that won't be seen. That's where you want to put the supports.
Absolutely.
So I tried to put them on the bottom. And the other problem is this has a big cross section. So if you picture, like once it gets like midway, and this is a very good example here where this one failed. So this is the cross section of what it has to peel off the print bed to get to the next layer. And when you start getting to peeling off a big section like this, it can break off the supports, which is what happened with this, because it's a lot of shear force that you're putting on that.
Right.
So if you orient it this way, no matter where you are in this, the cross section is way smaller, which not only helps you with successful prints, but it tends to give you better detail. So thinking about that is important.
Something that's also interesting to note that when we print with FDM printers, there's also a lattice network inside for the structure of the print.
The infill.
The
correct.
infill. Here, it's solid.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting point, and it's a good example of designing your model for a specific printer. Sometimes I'll have the same model, but in 3 different versions for 3 different printers.
Wow.
Because, so for example, the Scuttlefish is a solid model. So if I put this on an FDM printer,
It's going to use a lot of material.
but on an FDM printer, I can say make this 20% filled and make the walls 2 layers thick. So you can save a ton of material and make it print faster. Resin printers don't do that. Even the high-end printers don't do, for the most part, don't do that. If it's a solid model, it's a solid model. So if I wanted this hollow, I would have to manually make this model hollow with a hole for draining liquid, and you'd have to consciously do that, which is a lot more work.
Right.
So it's interesting, but on the other hand, this in one piece would be very difficult to print on an FDM printer.
Yeah. So before we move on, I want to show a few more successes of prints we've had with this printer. For example, we printed 2 of these Nautilus ships.
Yeah, Squid Attack.
Squid Attack. One of them still has the support structure, so print it this way. And on this one, where we remove the support structure, because of the texture of this, you can barely see any of the layers.
The texturing of the skin on the squid is great.
It looks almost like it's a cast product. That's how beautiful it is. I showed this to some of our friends, everyone who comes by the office, and they couldn't believe this is printed with a 3D printer because it looks like a cast.
It looks really good, and the fact that these little tentacles that stand out are like free, you know, and it's really good. That's actually another one from Bold Machines, which I did the Scuttlefish for.
Yep.
They have a thing for squids, apparently.
And then we've also done tests of different materials. You also printed your
the famous jet car.
Car.
Buckaroo Banzai jet car.
Yep. And you can tell on the back, here's the difference. On this side, this is the Form 1.
Yep.
This is the Form 2. And just look at the back and the detail. You pointed out you can even see the detail on the license plate on the Form 2 print on your right.
Because not only, part of the thing they did with this, it has I think the laser is 50% more powerful, which allows for, it gave them faster prints and finer detail, because the feature resolution was 300 microns on this that it could resolve. On the Form 2, it's 200. So you can read the license plate on this one.
That's amazing.
It's pretty good.
That's pretty cool. We also downloaded some models from Thingiverse, converted them and ported them to be printed on the Form 2, something like the Zorg ZF1. Now, this is a perfect case of a model that maybe wasn't intended to be 3D printed.
Yes.
It worked, and it looks beautiful, but it took a hell of a lot of work to get it out of the support structure.
And this is a great example of that. Not everything is meant to be 3D printed. So the problem with it is it's made in one piece, like the model is all one piece. So you ran into a few issues with that. First, removing all the support material. There is support material up inside where all these pieces are that you simply couldn't get to without breaking things. The other problem with this is that it was meant as a digital model, so it wasn't necessarily made with the thought of manufacturing. So some of these walls are very, very thin, and especially at this scale. So you can see where these actually started cracking even before it was finished and out of the printer.
Wow, yeah, you can see right there, it's cracking on that layer right there.
And this is one of my favorite things to show off is if you look real careful in this bottom piece, there's a giant bubble in here.
Yeah.
And that's because this, instead of being modeled as solid, this was modeled as a hollow piece.
And so when it came out?
With no hole in it. So there's actually a bubble of trapped resin in there, which if you're not careful, you spring a leak in and you get resin everywhere. So But having said, if you look at the details on the weaponry up here and all the detail, it is gorgeous. And some of the girder work on it, the detail on it printed out great. It's just that this is no fault of the printer itself. It's more of the model. And in this case, I would have divided this up into more pieces or thickened up the walls.
Yeah. Now, 3D printers, I know people are tempted to buy one. They think the learning curve is easy. And there's still a lot of things that you need to know in the nitty-gritty nuances of running both FDM and an SLA printer. For the SLA prints, for example, we've had some spectacular failures in addition to some successes. Here's how the Form 2 can fail. One of the most common failures is the contamination in the pool of the resin. If there's a piece of cured resin that drops off from a print, and if we're not using the clear resin plastic and it's in the black plastic, and you don't comb through it, then it can actually obscure the laser.
Yeah, so this is a good example of that. Before this one failed, the vat got contaminated, and this is really bad. So it's just, there was chunks of resin floating around there that not only obscured the laser, but then bonded to layers as well. So it just made for a real junky print. Yeah, we had a few instances where the base, the raft here, didn't even adhere, which is somewhat unusual. We never did quite. The one time we do know, I swapped resins, and so when you're swapping the resins, you want to clean everything up. So I wiped down the platform with alcohol so that black resin didn't get in the clear, and I didn't let it dry long enough, which then contaminated it, and it didn't stick. Now, other times we weren't sure why it didn't stick, and we think, I talked to Formlabs about it, I think it was a firmware thing, because after the recent firmware update, we have had no failures.
Right. So here's an interesting case of a failure. We tried to print a Borg sphere, at least half of one, and it prints this way. You have the support structure on the inside, which we've snapped off, but it failed to print just one part, and you can see it actually building up that resin on the interior. To a point where it just looks like a hole, and then subsequently cracked the entire.
I'm not sure exactly what happened with the Borg sphere. Did it break loose of the supports, or did we remove those?
Oh, I removed them separately.
Okay, because so this guy, I'm not exactly sure what happened, and that's just going to show. No matter what printer you have, even if it's a high-end machine, you're going to have failures. It happens. This one just was particularly spectacular. Some of the failures we had, like this guy. You can customize the supports, which involves how dense they are and how big the little points it attach to. So in an effort to make cleanup easier and leave less marks, I was fiddling with things, and I made really tiny points, and I thinned out the layers. And I think a lot of the failures we had was me screwing around with the supports. But it's a learning process.
Totally.
This one is a mystery, though. I don't know the doomed Borg sphere.
So the Formlabs, they've had their prints out for a while, the Form 1, the Form 1 Plus, and the Form 2 has some specific upgrades. It's not just about the high resolution, the new and the new laser system. It now actually uses a couple different things. There's the print cartridge, for example.
They did a major upgrade on this. Like, this wasn't like a minor thing. It definitely,
it's a revamp.
It definitely deserves to be its own new model. And so we had the Form 1, and I had the Form 1 Plus that we tested. And while I liked it, I had a lot of issues. I had a lot of failed prints, and we had a failed laser and a failed peel mechanism. And I felt it had a lot of potential, but there was kind of a list of things that was like, if this and this and this and this, then I think it would be the perfect machine. So they actually called us in to take a sneak peek before it was released, and they pretty much went down the list, and it was like everything that I wish that they would fix.
Wow. So let's go through some of those things.
Yeah, so it has a 40% bigger build volume than the Form 1 Plus. It has a 50% more powerful laser that is faster and does finer detail. Now, I didn't keep a log of how long the Form 1 prints took, but I could definitely notice that this was faster.
Yep.
I definitely felt that.
It's a little quieter.
It is a little quieter. There's certain things that made it a little noisy because they added this wiping mechanism, but overall compared to an FDM machine, it's pretty quiet.
Oh yeah.
The biggest thing that they did, which made me really happy, was they sealed the optics chamber. And we can show it later, but there's a glass that seals off the laser and the mirrors down below. On the previous version, it was open. And so that was a scary game, that if you took the tray out and the platform was still there, you could get a drip of resin down on the mirror, dirt and dust Gus got down there all the time, and I have a background in film and TV repair, so I know how to clean optics, and it was a nightmare. So my number one thing was that I wanted them to do that, and they did. And apparently they put it in a room full of talcum powder, and they torture test it to make sure that nothing gets in there. And it's great. If you get a little something on the window up top, it's far easier to clean off. So that was a big one for me. They revamped the peeling mechanism. So
describe the peeling mechanism.
Yeah.
What does that do?
So as we were watching it do each layer, when it has to basically peel the layer it just baked to raise it up and go to the next layer. So on the old one, it used a tilt mechanism. So the model would be laying on there, and it would tilt it down and peel it off the silicon bottom, and then it would tilt it back up and raise it a little bit, and then it would do the thing. With the new one, it does a side-to-side, which puts less stress on the model, and it's less likely to break off of the supports or get skewed. And the other thing that they added was a wiping mechanism. So not only does it go side-to-side, but a wiper goes through the resin. And that does a few things. It on the black and grays, which have dyes in them, it keeps everything stirred up, so everything's distributed well, like the pigment. It can save prints. So a common problem is on a failed print is you get a layer that gets stuck to the bottom rather than to the model. And that was the kiss of death before, where the whole model would just be done. In this case, the wiper will peel that off, and you might be able to get away with the rest of the model with maybe a minor blemish.
Nice.
So that helps a lot. It keeps debris out of the way. And overall, other than the few times when it didn't stick to the platform, which, like I said, seems to have been resolved with the firmware update, we have had very few failed prints due to the support or anything like that. So
there is going to be upkeep when owning a printer like this. There are consumables, things that you have to spend money on. Of course, there's the resin. Now, the resin this time are on these proprietary cartridges. Before, the resin you poured into the reservoir.
Yeah, it just came in a jug.
And now it's like the same amount. You instead of a liter, you have now a liter in this cartridge, and it's just a plastic cartridge. But there's electronics in here,
which may cause some people to be like, oh, DRM. But what the electronics do is it communicates what resin is loaded into the machine, and it communicates with the tray so that it knows when it's almost out of resin. So it can give you a warning or stop or pause. And this is the biggest thing. It will auto-fill the tray. Before, if you had a really long print, you might have to come in and refill the tank at some point.
Actually pour it into the tank.
Yeah. And if you didn't, it would just keep printing away, and there'd just be no resin there to print with.
Right. This just plugs into the back. You pop the air vent, and then it just pushes into the bottom. Can you refill these?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes, because it's not. So you can. So let's talk about. It's not, like I said, it's not DRM. Because you can override that. So you can say, don't use the cartridge, I'm going to pour it directly into the tray. Right. So if you have old Form 1 resin, which is the same stuff, you can pour it into the tray. Or as far as I know, this is just a screw top, like a shampoo bottle. You could
pour directly in here.
If you had an empty one, now, because they're chipped, you would need a gray cartridge, for example, as far as I know. But if you had gray in an old bottle, as far as I understand, you can pour it in, and basically has a little rubber spout that there's a claw in there that squeezes it open, and it just dribbles in. Now, the initial filling, on an empty tank, can take a while. It's a little slow, but I think you could probably take the cap off and fill it manually, and then let it top it off, as it prints. And then, like I said, they just drop in. And overall, these have been really nice. It really contained the mess. It made changing resins a lot easier, and I quite like the cartridges.
Has the price changed?
Same price.
Same price for a bottle as a cartridge?
Let me consult that. These run, depending on the material, $149 to $175 a liter. And that price remains the same.
And a liter, how many prints can that get you?
That's a hard metric. What they do, Formlabs does a little rook, like a chess piece rook, that is like their signature print, and you can print a whole bunch of those that they show you graphically. Now, last time I had, a lot of failures and stuff on the Form 1. We had a Ziploc bag that was like this that didn't even use up a whole cartridge. So
everything on this table.
We didn't, all the black stuff plus more of this was on less than one cartridge.
Got it.
So I feel that like you get a feel for like how much, like I feel like I get good value out of a roll of filament, for example, and I think you get good value out of a cartridge of resin as well.
As long as you don't commit so much to a failed print.
Exactly, it's a little more pricey for failed prints, but it depends what you're doing. You got to decide what printer fits your needs and if this is worth it for you.
Now, another consumable is the actual tray itself, because the laser goes through the tray, cures the resin, but in the process of going through the tray, the silicone, over time, it can actually haze up.
I wish I had an example, but so it has an optically clear silicon in the bottom, and the laser will degrade the silicon after a while, and what'll start to get hazy, like kind of cloudy, and eventually that will start to disrupt the laser, and it won't be able to draw as well. So the key with that is to move your prints around on the print bed. So like I will usually just keep track of like I printed in this corner, this corner, this corner. They hope to actually address that with some kind of software or firmware tracking in the future, which would help a lot. So that will distribute the use of the tray more evenly.
Yeah, we started printing the center using the clear resin, and we printed a few of these guys, a bunch of scuttlefish, these two guys. These are like 11 to 14-hour prints, and we got through a tray, I think, before we finished the cartridge because we weren't being smart about where we're positioning the objects.
We forgot about moving around.
Yeah.
And their general recommendation is 1 tray per 2 liters of resin. So, and the trays run $59. Now, that's the one thing I would love to see some way to swap out the silicon bottom because it seems so wasteful to have to pitch the whole tray. But
now, can you use the trays between the different resins? If I'm using gray resin or the tough resin?
Technically, yes.
You'd have to clean it out very intensely?
It sucks.
Wow.
Yeah. So you want a dedicated tray per resin. Really, if you're going to use this machine on any regular basis, I have clean trays out in an emergency, but it's really annoying. So you want to have a dedicated tray per resin.
Yeah, some other minor upgrades to this. There's a full color touchscreen down the front for queuing up your prints. It has Wi-Fi built in, so you can use the software, the preform software, send the files over layer by layer over Wi-Fi. There is, of course, USB and even Ethernet in the back if you want to move files over the traditional way. I actually had some problems with the Wi-Fi with our network.
It was cutting out a few times,
but it did get through at the end. The software, pretty easy to use. Like you said, you can adjust your support structure, the density, the orientation, how fine the points are, and it'll even give you like a heat map in the software to show where in the print you're not getting enough support.
Yes.
So that stuff is all great. And then, well, we finished printing something in this video quite a while ago, and we wanted to show you what the actual cleanup process is like. So let's reset up here and then bring some of the cleanup trays and get this scuttlefish out so you guys can see it.
Yeah.
All right, Sean, so the scuttlefish is printed, and we're ready to show you out there what the cleanup process is like. So what do we have in front of us?
We have alcohol.
Alcohol.
Yeah. So the other nice thing I like about the Formlabs kit is that it's complete. So it has a cleaning station that comes with it as well. And they actually did a major upgrade on this as well, where they have easy open lids that you can do one-handed. It also comes with sealing lids that if you're going to have this sealed for unused for a while, and it has a little cleaning basket to dunk it. So you have the dirty one where you do the initial rinse. So this is getting all the loose excess resin off of this, and then it has the second rinse, which gets the last little bit off. So
the first thing I'm going to do is take the build platform out of the printer, and as you can see, there's actually drips of resin because it's been dipping itself into the reservoir the whole time. That actually stays there. If a print finishes, overnight and you have it left on over the weekend, it'll be fine. This clear plastic will actually prevent it from all the UV.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to do first of all is dump that extra resin back into the reservoir.
Gotta save every little bit.
Every little bit. At $150 a liter.
Yeah.
Gotta save every little bit. Cool. There it goes. Now, do you do anything else to clean off the build platform?
That's usually all I do. I usually don't do anything more than that unless I'm changing the resin.
Great. And because we're using clear resin, at least for this instance, I can see that there are no fallen pieces in here, nothing we need to comb out. With other ones, you actually have literally taken a comb and gone through.
That is as complete as this setup is. The one missing piece is if you do have bits or things that break off, you literally go to the CVS or something and you get a hair comb and you run it through the tank as a little sifter. So yeah.
Now, at this point, it's still pretty firmly stuck.
Very much so.
And I can't just pry it off my fingers. You got gloves on, and they give you actually a platform.
So, yeah, they gave you this little handle. Well, it's not actually that little, but to help you have a grip. And so what they did here, this is really on there. And I have broken prints in the past trying to get them off. So what they did might be a little hard to see on this, but there's little helper notches. So they put little notches that give you a place to get the scraper under. So
and that's in the software. So in the software, when you load a model in, and as you're adjusting, and I would use this guy.
You like that one?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, it does have the little notch in it, so yeah.
As you're loading your support structure, you can actually, there you go.
There we go. That was not too bad.
Lay out the helper notches and then pop 2 things out.
Yeah.
And there it goes. Now, at this point, I can scrape this a little bit.
Yeah, so you might get, the one thing you might get some actual little bits, especially after scraping it. So it's a good thing to just take this and do like a scrape or 2 before you put it back in there. So
I'll take care of that.
All right. So at this point, we're going to move this to the alcohol bath. And normally you would let this soak for a few minutes, but for our demo purposes, we're going to pretend. And you have 5 minutes later.
Well, you have 2 alcohol baths.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Is it just this? Is there a special?
The first one tends to get really, really dirty. And then the second one is your cleaner one, that is your final rinse. Now, this is just regular old isopropyl. I believe you can use denatured too. I would need to double check on this, but you can get it at any pharmacy or anything like that. I will often get it at the hardware store, like in the big metal cans, so in bulk, because it's quite a lot. And it does last a long time, so
Yep. Do you want to give it a rinse?
Let's do a second rinse.
And then you take this out. At this point, a lot of that excess resin's already rinsed off.
Yeah.
Let's give it a final wash. Now, is there any concern of leaving it in the isopropyl for too long?
I wouldn't leave it in there overnight, but if you forgot like for an hour or 2, you'd probably be fine. Because the alcohol dissolves the resin, so it can start to eat away at even the cured stuff. But for the most part, yeah, it's pretty good. So normally, like I said, we would leave this in longer, but for the magic of the internet, we're going to take everything out. So we have a stand and a scuttlefish. And it does come with some starter gloves. I'd highly recommend using them. So
at this point, that's basically it. It's a little wet right now. The alcohol is going to evaporate. It's going to be fine. You're going to let it dampen off. Maybe let it sit. What type of environments do you want to use this in? With windows? Is natural light okay?
Well, the alcohol is far stinkier than any of the resin is. So it's not bad to have some ventilation because of this guy. One thing, you need a lot more space for this than you do for an FDM printer because you have all of this to deal with, and no matter how hard you try, everything is going to get sticky. Like, you can see it all over the cleaning station. It's terrible. So that is just no way around it. It's going to get sticky. Best not to have it in front of a nice sunny window, probably, because this is UV reactant. So the finished models, you don't want to let them sitting in the sun or like under a halogen light or anything like that, because it can discolor or even make them brittle or warp them if it's thin stuff. Now, having said that, this is somewhat counterintuitive. When you take these out, even after they dry off, they're gonna be a little gummy, a little tacky, and that's because especially after washing the alcohol and everything, this isn't 100% completely cured. So one of the things that they do professionally and what they do like at Formlabs when they're testing stuff is they have a UV oven. Now there are actually professional UV ovens like for sterilization and stuff like that. The really high-end printers come with a dedicated, it looks like a little furnace that's a UV oven. But you can, Formlabs has a really great video up about making a little UV oven using a little nail salon UV cure for nails.
Totally.
$25 on Amazon, and you can basically make a little box with some mirrors or foil in it to reflect the light around evenly and pop this in for a little while to cure. That's one of the things I hope to do for a project later. So we've just been handling them normally. So after because what you want to do is if you're going to, you can sand and paint these like a regular plastic model, but you want to let them fully cure, because if you try sanding them right out of the thing, or even a day later, they're going to be a little gummy. It's just going to
smear.
It won't actually sand you. It'll just kind of gum up everything.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind. And another thing I will do is I will often, if I'm not going to paint these, I'll at least put a clear coat on them, just in case if I do have it sitting by a window or any kind of UV, it'll protect it.
Cool. So we'll let this normally sit for a bit, and then you can just get some snips.
Yeah.
Hold this and just snip off the pieces. We're just going to demo that really quickly.
So they come with flush cuts. I have my fancy ones from Xuron, and photo etch scissors, which are excellent for removing the supports. So you can basically some of these you can just break off by hand, but if it's a particularly delicate piece, you definitely want to go in. If you do the flush cuts, it will break it off to where you can barely see where it was. And so this is not too bad on the scuttlefish. There's not too many, but sometimes this can be really tedious. And a good tip is to go to the raft and just chop that up first. It will make getting everything else off. Oh, shrapnel! It'll make everything else a lot easier. And then you can go and snip these all off. And then you can do additional cleanup with an X-Acto. And then when it's fully cured, a little bit of sandpaper, and they recommend a little mineral oil, because sometimes it'll leave like a little white mark wherever you broke off the supports. So having said that, we talked earlier about that we got some mushy parts on some of the things. And that's part of the nature of like a prosumer desktop that you can buy for your home or small business versus a tens of thousands of dollars like professional machine. The professional machines tend to, rather than hanging from a platform, they have a platform that is in a vat of liquid, like a big vat. So the platform actually sinks down into the vat to start, or it keeps sinking down into this vat farther and farther. So there's no strain on it between layers. So it's because it's just dropping it down and doing the next layer. So you need a really big machine to do that because it's a really big vat and you got to keep it really clean and all that stuff. But the advantage of that is that you can have a very, very fine lattice work of support. It's like angel hair, and you can just take it and rip it off really easily. The nature of this guy, because it's hanging and it has to peel off the bottom, it needs much heftier supports than a professional machine. So it's going to tend to leave bigger marks no matter what.
Absolutely.
So our $200 print had very fine marks that were easier to clean up. These can be a little bit more of a challenge to clean up and tend to get, a few little mushy areas, but you can orient or even divide the model up to minimize that.
A little bit of pre-planning and practice goes a long way with this printer. And it really is a prosumer model. This, even though they're calling it a desktop printer, it's going to be for rapid prototyping. It's not going to be your first 3D printer. It's $3,500 for the Form 2.
Yes.
The Form 1 Plus still on sale though.
It's at $2,800 currently. $2,799.
Right. And then, of course, the cartridges and the resin, about $150 for a liter of it. And you also have to buy the trays every 2 cartridges or so. But the investment really depends on what you're going to be doing with it. Like we've been using it a lot. We've been printing a lot. The print quality is great. If you're making little miniatures, I think that's fine. But if you're going to be making like a BB-8 or something where you might want to put multiple things, look into all your options.
I printed something for Tippett Studio and they're quite pleased.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for reviewing the Form 2, the Formlabs Form 2 SLA desktop 3D printer. If you guys have questions about this printer or any other 3D printing projects we do on Tested, please post them in the comments below. We've been having a great time with this printer.
Yes.
I think we're going to continue printing some stuff. Do you want
definitely have
in the
some
future?
We have some plans, yes.
So stay tuned for that. Until then, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, and Sean and I will see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.